side file an appeal, or otherwise what will, or the next thing which will arise is they may go ahead with the attachment or some other action, then High Court can come into the picture. There is a reckless explanation. If the appeal is not filed within 3 months, then one need not worry about. This is only the precautionary thing I am actually explaining. That as a worst case scenario, just you file an appeal that there is a demand. If the appeal is not filed, this demand, it is not going to hurt you in any manner, because the issue of show cause notice is mandatory, as yesterday I was explaining. The next question, very important question is, will an appeal lie against the assessment of bill of entry? In Karan Associates, I just forgot to mention the citation. I will just put it into my final presentation. In Karan Associates, it has been held that the assessment of bill of entry is an appealable order. One of the most significant and bombshell judgment was delivered by the larger bench of the Supreme Court almost 2 years back, in ITC Limited versus CCE. In ITC Limited, it was a question of claiming the refund of the custom duty paid by the company without challenging the assessment of the bill of entry. The company had filed the bill of entry. In bill of entry on the imported goods, we make 3 claims. One relating to the customs, another classification, second relating to valuation, and third relating to the any exemption notification, if there is any. Normally, we make these 3 claims, which are the 3 pillars of the assessment. And in all these 3 cases, if whatever has been claimed by the importer, if it is accepted and based on that assessment and let import order is passed, the clearance order is, goods are allowed to be cleared. Later on, if the company realizes, importer realizes that he has paid excess duty in excess under mistake of law by not availing certain concessional benefit, or by wrongly classifying, or on some component of the value which was not liable to take duty, he can file the refund claim. Now that refund claim, up till now, there has not been much issue. These are the payment in excess under mistake of law. However, yes, I'm coming to that handling of the appeal also. I'm just laying down all these fundamental things. And however, in this absolutely dynamite judgment, Supreme Court has said that if the assessment on bill of entry is not challenged, then the refund claim will not lie. And this is a extremely judgment with the far-reaching implications. I'm filing a bill of entry as an importer with certain claims. My claims are already accepted. Where is the question of my filing the appeal? Against which part of the bill of entry assessment can I be said to be aggrieved? How can I file an appeal? There are many questions which have arisen. I'm not going into the detail. The other question which will arise, department, unfortunately, revenue authorities, in their overzealousness and over enthusiasm, and when they are always thinking to defeat the legitimate refund claim of a taxpayer under one pretext or another. I mean, refund is something they abhor, they don't like to give, as if the refund is going out of their own pocket. I have been repeatedly conversing that if the refund provisions are taken away from the taxation statute, then majority of the litigation will die down. Okay, I have paid, you pocket that money, because in any case, you are not going to give me that money. And not at least for a few years, for a few decades, and at the exorbitant cost. Every single way of earning the, taking back the refund is being resisted, is being blocked by the revenue officer or by the legislature. But that's a different story. However, the flip side, nobody has realized, the department, and this is now going to be the major issue. If something happens to refund, assessment of bill of entry without challenging it, if refund cannot lie, then by the same corollary, same analogy, the demand also cannot lie if the assessment of bill of entry is not challenged by the department. And this is the legal proposition which one have to be very careful to raise, but it is a valid proposition in my opinion, and one can challenge this on this ground. That if the department has not challenged the assessment of the bill of entry, then they cannot actually invoke section 28 and raise the demand against me. And I'm very firmly of the view, ITC judgment in whatever context it has been delivered, it requires the serious reconsideration by the still larger bench. Otherwise, catastrophic impact is going to be felt by everybody. It is already started. These are only tremors, going to be the earthquake sooner or later. And the funny part of this is that this earthquake aftermath will be felt more by the department probably rather than by the taxpayers. Taxpayers may lose some few thousands of crores of refund across the country. Suppose in right earnest, the ratio of the judgment is applied, but the department may lose thousands and thousands of crores of demand on a day-to-day basis. On the day-to-day basis, if the very ratio is upheld against the department, that since you have not challenged the bill of entry assessment, then you cannot raise the demand. This is akin to the Cannon judgment, where the DRI powers have been, drastically commented upon by the Supreme Court. And this is what, when the legitimate claim of the refund is so to be rejected, Abel Mujema, it may boomerang on the department, but all said and done, on the legal perspective, from the realistic perspective, I hope that the larger bench of the Supreme Court, still larger bench of the Supreme Court, may seriously reconsider this issue of the judgment in ITC. Let us wait. Either there will be some respite or there could be unbelievable litigation on this side, on both the sides. Next. Section 121 lays down clearly that no appeal will lie against the following 4 types of orders. An order of the commissioner or other authority empowered to the proceedings from one, or direct the transfer of proceedings from one person to another person. An order pertaining to the seizure or retention of the books of account, registers or documents, etc. An order sanctioning prosecution under this Act, or an order passed under Section 8I. In all these cases, it has been provided that no appeal will lie. These are basically administrative type of order, which are normally passed on the file, and these are held to be not appealable clearly under Section 121. Section 8I pertains to the payment of tax and other amount in installments. If the commissioner has passed an order giving the facility for passing the making the payment in installment, that order itself cannot be the matter of the challenge before the appellate authority. Taxpayer has approached the commissioner for facility of grant of, I will be coming to that. I'm taking one step by one step. I will be dealing with the practical aspects of the appeal also. So these are the 4 cases where the appeals have been not provided for statutorily. Next. Can a mere reminder be treated as appeal? This was the case of Indian Aluminium, where there was a continuous demand, and this was held to be, in that particular case, this was held to be the appealable order. Can an appeal be filed against an oral order? Can an order be oral? In Pasupati Chemicals and Pharmaceuticals Limited, Kolkata High Court said no appeal will lie against an oral order. And there was a very practical reason for this. If an appeal is allowed to be filed against an oral order, what was really said orally will become the matter of perennial dispute between both the sides. One side saying that you had actually said like this, another side saying I never said this. And there will not be any end, and there will not be a witness to that. There will not be any way to determine who is right and who is wrong. So obviously oral order cannot be a subject matter of the challenge. And in a taxation regime, on the serious matter at the grassroots level, everything oral and verbal should be avoided as far as possible. Everything. Relationship, maintaining relationship is one thing, and keeping everything on record, black and white, is another thing. One has to strike the balance between the two. And when I'm saying maintaining the relationship, everybody can have their own take on that, how to maintain the relationship. I am no one to say anything. I only know how to keep the safe distance with the department, even while I have excellent friends in my department, but they are my friends only, nothing beyond that, nothing lesser than that. So maintaining the relationship has a lot of different connotation. I'm fully aware of that. Next. Appeal and revision. Statutory provisions are contained in section 107 to 121. First appeal before the appellate authority is 107, and with the rule. relating to revisionary authority is 1028. Second appeal is 109 to 114. Appeal to High Court. And lastly, section 120, 118 is the, sorry, I just forgot to mention, appeal to Supreme Court, section 118. Next. Fine. From here we will start. I think 5 minutes break will be fine. Yes. The next slide, please. Yeah, these are the statutory provisions. And as we have seen, from section 107 to 121. Am I clear now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. By the way, yeah, the break was welcome. Generally, I don't take the break, but yes, this was a welcome break. Federal character of Indian policy required that we have a sort of a dual GST, and the uniform GST across the country was not possible, and there are constitutional restrictions. I'm not expecting a uniform GST in our country unless there is a massive change in the very massive, grassroots level change in the polity, the very character of the Indian polity. I'm not expecting this. And with the adoption of the dual GST, the one striking feature of the GST is the powers concurrent jurisdiction vested in the center and the states to levy the tax, that is GST, on the same tax base. And at the administrative level, at the implementation level, it has created some issues. One of the issues which is normally fomenting the, bothering the taxpayers is whether the taxpayer is required to approach both the authorities in the matter of filing of the appeal. When in a typical case, when the demand is confirmed against which is comprising of CGST and SGST both, but the order is passed by the central GST officer or the order is passed by the state GST officer, if the taxpayer falls within the state jurisdiction, in that case, whether a person is required to file the appeal for both the authorities, the central GST authority for the CGST portion and the state GST authority for the state GST portion. Fortunately, the scheme of the things, and as clarified by the board, only one appeal shall lie with the first appellate authority of the act under whose jurisdiction the officer has passed an order. So if the state GST authority has filed I hope all others are, couple of members have some issue, but I'm able to, I'm audible, no?
Yes. You are
okay, fine. Audible. Okay, fine. Right.
Voice is clear, sir. Participants, if you're having any problem, please check your internet connectivity. Voice is perfectly clear.
Okay, fine.
Please continue, sir.
Right. So the CBSE has clarified that only one appeal will lie before the first appellate authority. If the order is passed by the state GST officer, then the appeal will lie to the first appellate authority, as may be operating under the state GST authority. If it is a central GST, then central GST. Next. Monetary limits for filing an appeal. Under the erstwhile, there was a, the national litigation policy was formulated by the government, and the sole aim of this was to really reduce the litigation in the revenue matters, both direct tax and indirect tax. And based on that, it was thought fit, an idea was conceived about restricting the filing of the appeals by the revenue before the first appellate authority, that is tribunal court and high court, sorry, not first appellate authority, below certain limit. If the amount of tax or duty involved is below certain limit, then revenue shall not actually file the appeal. That was the aim of this litigation policy. And it is, then the limits were set in, it is 50 lakhs, the 20 lakhs, 50 lakhs, and 1 crore. As far as the Supreme Court, High Court, and Tribunal, that is the 20 lakhs, 50 lakhs, and 1 crore. 20 lakhs for Tribunal, 50 lakhs for High Court, and 1 crore. This has been further revised also, but this is, I'm making a passing reference only for the purpose that so far no such monetary limits for filing the appeal in GST has been set in. Maybe the time is not right. The law is in its nascent stage. We are only having hardly 4 years, and with the tribunal nowhere in the picture, the limit has not been set in, but you can expect such limits also over a period of time. But right now there is no monetary limit for the revenue to file an appeal under GST. Next. First appellate authority, any person aggrieved by any decision or order passed under the Act by an adjudicating authority may appeal to such appellate authority as may be prescribed. Adjudicating authority is defined under section 2 subsection 4, and a very careful look at the definition will prove that the anti-profiteering authority has been kept outside the purview of the adjudicating authority definition. So under section 171, when an order is passed by anti-profiteering authority, then no appeal will lie before the first appellate authority or before the appellate tribunal against such order passed by the anti-profiteering authority. Please bear it in mind. Order of the appellate anti-profiteering authority can only be challenged by way of the petition before the High Court. It cannot be gone through via first appellate authority or second appellate authority. This amendment was in fact inserted later on effective from 1st February 2019 by the CGST Amendment Act 2018. This amendment was made whereby adjudicating authority definition has been amended. Appellate authority has been defined to mean an authority appointed or authorized to hear appeals as referred to in section 107. That is the first appellate. And then board has issued the circulars designating and establishing the various officers as appellate authorities with the proper jurisdiction, their geographical jurisdiction. Next. Appellate authorities, the structure is in the context of if you will find there is a FAQ, the table has been given, I'm not referring to that. In short, the appeal will lie in the GST before the Joint Commissioner appeals or before the Additional Commissioner appeals. If the order is passed by the Assistant Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, the appeal will lie before the Joint Commissioner appeals. And if the order is passed by the Joint Commissioner appeals or Additional Commissioner, then the appeal will lie before the Additional Commissioner appeals. One striking feature about the appellate mechanism under GST, and this is extremely important and crucial, is the absence of powers for the commissioner to adjudicate the matter. The commissioners are not designated as an adjudicating authority under GST law at all. Unlike under the present excise, customs and service tax, you know that if the demand is beyond certain limit, the 2 crore is the limit, then the commissioner adjudicates the case. High level evasion cases or high level cases, high stake involved, are always, even SOCO notice is also issued by the commissioner at times, and the commissioner adjudicates the matter from where the appeal will directly lie to the tribunal. However, this age-old practice, which has been in vogue under excise right from the beginning and later on in service tax and custom also, has been is not to be seen under GST. Even a 500 crore demand or a 5,000 crore demand, or a it could be that can be adjudicated by the Joint Commissioner or Additional Commissioner, against which the appeal will lie to the Joint Commissioner appeals or Additional Commissioner appeals. And this is extremely important. One of the reasons is I could see that about divesting the powers of the commissioner to act as an adjudicating authority is this dual GST and the state and central relationship. Unlike the center in excise, custom, service tax, the hierarchical structure which is prevalent under the central tax legislations is not there in the VAT laws. VAT laws has its own different structure, and such concept of commissioner having acted as an adjudicating authority, or they don't have this. And this is why probably adopting from the VAT jurisdiction, keeping the VAT structure in mind, where they don't have such type of designated officers of the level of commissioner who adjudicates the matter. I think the in the GST that has been adopted, and it is restricted up to Additional Commissioner appeals or Joint Commissioner appeals. But this is very significant because no doubt it provides the taxpayer 2 opportunities, unlike under excise, custom, service tax, where the first appeal itself will lie to the tribunal against the commissioner order. Here the taxpayer will have 2 opportunities. he can go to the first commissioner appeals. I mean, that is the first appellate authority and then the tribunal. In case of appeals by the department, departmental appeal will again be before the commissioner appeals only as an officer. Yes, just like income tax, as an officer, not of the not below the rank of the joint commissioner appeal. So when the department under section 1072, the commissioner undertakes the scrutiny of the order, the scrutiny of the order or examination of the order passed by his subordinate, he may feel that this order passed by the subordinate officer is not proper and correct, and therefore he may direct the officer to file an application, which we will loosely call it as a department appeal, before the commissioner, first commissioner appellate authority, before the joint commissioner appeals. Next. In case of aggrieved person, when a party, the taxpayer, files an appeal, the time limit is 3 months from the date of communication of the order, within 3 months. If it is a review application by the department, by the commissioner, then the time limit is within 6 months of the communication of the order or decision. Please mark, for taxpayer, it is 3 months. For the department, it is 6 months. Obviously, departmental officers have much to do with, they are much more busier than the taxpayer. So taxpayer has not hardly anything to do except play to the dictate of the department. Departmental officer, definitely, it is fortunately it is 6 months, it is not 1 year. And as far as the powers to control the delay is concerned, I will come to that later on. So it's an independent subject. Next. Manner of filing an appeal or application. Appeal is to be filed. I will not like to deal with the form and everything. You are all very well aware of this. Appeal APL 01. It can be filed either electronically or otherwise. What is the meaning of otherwise? In my opinion, otherwise means it can be even manual also. Generally, when I file the appeal, up till now, I've been following. I'm basically from the old school, and I'm a bit orthodox in certain things. I'm a bit old-fashioned in certain things. So I file my appeal electronically, and simultaneously, I also file 2 copies of the appeal manually, also with all the relevant documents. I know I don't believe this digital thing and online thing. I'm slightly having some bit skeptical about the thing. So one can file this, and it is with the relevant documents. There is no mention about what are the relevant documents. Once the appeal is filed electronically or otherwise with relevant documents, then provisional knowledge acknowledgement will be generated, and this appeal is required to be signed as per Rule 26, Section 26, which is basically the digital signature. As per that, Rule 26, digital signature, and grounds of appeal and form is to be verified accordingly from the digital signature, and it can be even manually signature also when you are filing the manual appeal also. And next. It further provides, it is Rule 26. It further provides that after filing such appeal electronically, suppose online, the certified copy of the order is to be submitted within 7 days. And then final acknowledgement will be generated, and the appeal number will be generated and communicated to the party. The proviso says that if the certified copy is filed within 7 days, then the date of filing appeal will be the date of provisional acknowledgement. But if the certified copy is filed after 7 days, then the date of filing will be the date of final acknowledgement. Please keep this in mind, because this will have the bearing on whether the appeal has been filed within the time limit of 3 months or not. And this requirement of filing the certified copy of the file within 7 days, because that requirement is also for them. However, about the proviso, that is not there for the, in case of the department. Now, it says certified copy. Who will certify this? Generally, in excise service tax and customs, the appeals which are filed, the certificate, the photocopy of the certificate is the photocopy is always attested and certified by the range officer, the jurisdictional officer, without any objection. There is no cost attached to that. There are no charges to be paid for that. Whether the self-certified copy of the order can be filed, that is the question. So far, there is no provision, there is no clarification on that. As far as, come to next, please. No such provision for the department. That is for the, that they have to, if they file within 7 days or not. Certified by whom? Any charges payable or not? No. Generally, I would prefer that once the order is received online, you have to take out the copy. Once you prepare your appeal, file it online, because that is all, the utility is all well set. As far as the relevant documents are concerned, you can file the order copy online if possible. Otherwise, certified copy can be filed later on within 7 days. Please don't forget to file it within 7 days, lest there could be some issue regarding the time of filing of the appeal. As far as other documents are concerned, what are the other documents with the appeal? It should be ideally and invariably SOCOS notice, reply to SOCOS notice, and all the evidences which are relied upon in support of the submissions made in reply to the SOCOS notice. And obviously the order will always be there. Normally, I prepare the appeal. For all these years, we are trained that way. My first exhibit will always be the order. Coupled then the SOCOS notice. Before SOCOS notice, if there are any important correspondence, that can also come. Suppose there is an audit objection. That audit objection is followed by the SOCOS notice. Audit objection is replied to by the taxpayer. Then it is converted into SOCOS notice. SOCOS notice is replied, but before issue of the SOCOS notice, again, there are some correspondence between the parties apart from the audit related correspondence. Depending on what, these are facts to facts. So the broadly order, thereafter SOCOS notice, then reply, then return submissions, if any additional return submissions filed at the time of hearing before the adjudicating authority, or after closure of the hearing, also you can file your additional submissions. And any other documents like returns, etc. Never relied upon, you should never take it for granted that returns are available online and an officer can look at it. They will never look at it. Make it a habit of making the complete paper book, whether it is the tribunal, and this applies not only in GST, even the ongoing litigation of the excise service tax and customs also. Don't ever rely upon, okay, these are available with the department. All the relevant documents, including correspondence, returns, even audit objection, if you are challenging the issue on the time bar, on the ground that the previous audits have already undertaken, who have not taken out the objection, or having taken the objection, they have dropped the objection. In that case also, previous all audit reports and your replies to the audit reports should also be the part of the paper suitably by incorporating it in the statement of facts. I'll come to the statement of facts also. And all these can, and as far as the judgments are concerned, one, it is a prerogative, it is one's discretion. Judgments can form the part of the paper book, which is being filed as a part of the complete compilation of the relevant documents, or it can go separately at the time of hearing. There is no hard and fast rule about it. Nowadays, generally people prefer that unless the law is well settled by a particular judgment, which is not likely to be disturbed, it is better to await till the last date of the appeal. Once the hearing comes, before that the compilation of judgments can be made, so that one can make the last ditch examination, whether any of the judgments relied upon has been overruled or not, has been appealed against or not, though it will not lose its validity and binding nature merely because the appeal is filed by the revenue. And third, whether there is any contrary decision on the subject matter or not. This will be, one has to be very alert about this. This cannot be, but these are the standard thing. Then coming to the brief issue of the case under dispute, you will find that there are 3 columns identical in the Commissioner of First Appellate Authority and Tribunal. Brief issue of the case under dispute. When you are filing online appeal, obviously your appeal cannot go into pages and pages. So therefore, brief issue of the case under dispute. Suppose the demand has arisen on account of the wrong classification or wrong availment of the exemption, and this is under challenge. Your brief issue of the case under dispute can run into a couple of simple sentences that the issue involved in the impugn order in this in the present case relates to the demand of differential amount of tax raised and confirmed against the taxpayer on the basis of the classification product of the product under question or classification of the service, whatever, of the supply of service, as to whether the same falls under so-and-so as claimed by the appellant or falls under so-and-so as claimed by the department. But no, beyond that, there is no need to write detail in the brief issue of the case. You have to summarize. You have to only put the gist of the dispute in these few words in the column 9.1. Statement of facts. Generally, I don't like to write statement of facts and grounds of appeal online because of the space constraints and the word constraint. You can put statement of facts as per Annexure A and grounds of appeal as per Annexure B. And that Annexure A and B, you can, and here friends, please understand, unlike direct text, which many of you might be quite familiar with, indirect text, as yesterday I was mentioning, litigation is a very, very different ball game. Your typical income tax appeal, which I have come across umpteen number of times, personally and even in the tribunal, your typical statement of facts, yeah, you can request the court to, for some time, you can furnish it at a later point of time also. Before the first appellate authority, you can seek the time, but be very careful on that. Now, the statement of facts is most important. I have seen that very cursorily and superficially, the appeals are being drafted. Because in income tax, normally, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is this, that in income tax appeals, the reliance is more on the computations, which go as an annexure with all the supporting evidences and judgments if required. So it is more about the computation under the law, under the Income Tax Act. And your typical appeal runs into some 3-4 standard paragraph that the learned appeal, learned adjudicating authority or the learned additional commissioner or the learned deputy commissioner has erred in fact and both in law in rejecting the argument. The learned commissioner has actually erred in both in fact and in law, like that. Such type of appeal really will not carry you further in the indirect tax. Your appeal, the first important thing is, more than the grounds of appeal, the statement of facts is extremely important. And the statement of facts will depend upon how the case is presented at the SOCOS notice level. As yesterday I said, Supreme Court said that SOCOS notice is the foundation of the entire proceeding in Vrindavan Beverages case. Now, this is not only true for the department, it is also true for the taxpayer also. Just as the department cannot go beyond the SOCOS notice at the successive appeal stage, similarly, one has to presume that the taxpayer will also not be able to improve upon his defense as he goes up. He has to also play within the boundaries set by him through his first reply before the adjudicating authority. When I say first reply, means reply with any additional submissions at the adjudication level. Beyond that, the question of additional ground and additional evidence will come into play, which I will deal with in another few minutes. So the important thing is the reply at the adjudication level. And once you have to also play within that boundaries also. And there the statement of facts become very important. Ideally, when you are reading the SOCOS notice, one should develop a habit of making, when you are reading for the first time, many thoughts will strike you when you are reading it para after para. Immediately jot down their thoughts. Don't get into the clinical or analysis of the thoughts which are coming to you, whether that thought appeals to you or not. Something has struck you. So para by para, make a note. Make a note what actually strikes you. It can be anything. Whether some comment on the stand taken by the department, immediately something, no, this is absurd, this is wrong, this is against this law, this is against this judgment. So just jot down. Don't get into the detailed commentary on that. Don't analyze anything. Simply jot down whatever strikes you. Here, this particular document, okay, I will have to ask my client to submit this, give me this document. Make a note that this return is required, this letter is required, like that. Ideally, even before taking up this exercise, first thing everybody should do is, every SOCOS notice will have the list of normally RUD, that is the relied upon documents. Please check that each and every document mentioned in the relied upon document list is also supplied along with the SOCOS notice. That is must. And if it is not provided, it is your right to ask for that document before even you submit the reply.
Yeah.
Right? And then thereafter, you have to also see that unrelied upon documents, if department has actually seized the documents, then you can ask for the return of the document. If the department is under obligation to give those documents back to you, they cannot return. They may not be relevant for them in framing the charges against the taxpayer, but the taxpayer from perspective, it may be very relevant documents. There are judgments and there are board instruction on this, that unrelied upon documents should be immediately returned to the party. Now, so having satisfied yourself that all the documents are available with you as are referred to in the SOCOS notice, then take up this exercise and jot down. Another thing is, ideally one should always start preparing the chronology of the event. A statement of facts should actually flow into a particular sequence. Their chronology is important. Like, I normally prefer that if a particular document I am going to refer to in my grounds of appeal, one way or another, I am going to seek the reliance on that particular document, then I will build it into my statement of facts only. For instance, if I am challenging the demand on the ground of time bar, and one of the case I am saying that this, written that RUD with already, whatever RUD is with, wherever there is a document comment that available with the SSC, then you can ask your client to give it to you. That's a different matter. What I am saying is, if something is actually enclosed is written, but it is not given. It is as simple as that. So now, if I feel that one of the ground I will be relying upon for time bar will be the matter is within the full knowledge of the department, either in two ways. Suppose all audits have undertaken for the previous year. And second is where there has been some correspondence whereby the material facts I have already disclosed to the department. Then in the chronological sequence, I would put it in my statement of facts only and make it exhibits, make them exhibit. And then I will refer to it in my challenge on the grounds of appeal under time bar. I mean, everybody has their own way of practicing. I normally follow this rule. I don't like to follow, I'm not comfortable following reply to the SOCOS notice para-wise. Quite a few people follow that practice para-wise, and they say that, yes, this is accepted. This is accepted. I don't think we should really do that. What is accepted need not be written also. First para starts with a taxpayer knowing so-and-so, so-and-so, registered under so-and-so, so-and-so, and engage in the business activity of so-and-so, so-and-so, at so-and-so premises. Why should we write accepted? It doesn't make actually sense and doesn't actually have any value addition, simply. So therefore, para-wise reply, and para-wise reply tends to break the sequence. Para-wise reply can also really upset the chronology, and chronology is what is very important. This is something, I mean, everybody has their own way of practicing. I'm not saying I am the final one, but I mean, something which I have been following for more than 3 decades, and I'm very comfortable with it. In fact, my reply, my structure of the reply itself is statement of facts and grounds. And when it comes to appeal, it becomes statement of facts and grounds of appeal. It also helps me in 2 ways. One, when I go with this format at the reply level, and I create, when I'm in the chronology, important documents, everything, I build it into my statement of facts. There is, I mean, I normally do not miss anything. The chances of my missing out anything is very, very less. And friends, one fundamental principle one should always keep it in mind. It is the law, the facts which will decide which law will be applicable. The law cannot create the facts. If we have some judgment which we like, we are in love with that judgment, just because of that, we can't create the facts so that we can apply that judgment. The what principle of law will apply and which judgment will apply will all depend upon the facts of each case. Every case one should take into on merit, and one should be very, very guarded while following the copy-paste culture. The new generation, with due respect, believes in the copy and paste. One should be very, very careful. Even before doing the copy-paste, one should see that, yes, what I am doing is identical on both the cases. Therefore, I can pick up the ground from that particular case and paste it here with suitable modification. One should be very careful. Coming to the grounds of appeal, when you are reading the SOCOS notice, just note down very importantly, which are the grounds, plausible grounds you can take before in defense for your client. Always. Which are the grounds? Note down, only heading, on merits. On merits, what could be your ground? Challenge to classification, challenge to valuation. Suppose the demand is based on classification, or denial of exemption, or denial of the ITC. These are the ground on merits. So you have to just note down which are available. Then another ground could be time bar. So this is a broad ground on time bar, that even if the demand is held to be a sustainable on merit, the demand is time barred to the extent it is beyond the normal period of limitation. So this is a time bar ground. The third ground could be the computation, that the computation is arbitrary and inflated, resulting into the inflated demand. The fourth ground can be the exemption benefit has not been considered even while demanding the tax. One can claim the exemption if the demand is raised for the first time also, if exemption is available. So that could be the another ground. There could be ground whether the price should be treated as a transaction value should be treated as a cum tax or not, the cum duty principle or not. That is, yes, could be another ground. If the ITC benefit is not given while demanding the duty, suppose the taxpayer has not paid the tax at all on its supplies for any reason. I'm not going into the evasion cases. Normal supply, he was not registered under bona fide belief, and the demand is raised. Whether at this stage he can stake the claim of the ITC for that period. Suppose 17-18 demand is raised against the taxpayer and who has not registered himself, and he accepts, yes. So can he claim the ITC for that 17-18 period? Here some challenge will lie. We'll have to see how the jurisprudence develop on this issue. In erstwhile excise and service, it has been a settled law that even if the demand is raised by the department for the past period, the benefit of Senvet credit cannot be denied. The principle is also laid down by the Supreme Court in the Formica division case. And there are umpteen number, Gujarat Ambuja, and there are umpteen number of cases on this. Department at first level never gives the benefit of Senvet credit when they are adjudicating the demand. However, the tribunal invariably sends back the case for computation of the demand after considering the Senvet credit. The problem is that under GST, in section 16, subsection 1, it starts with every registered person shall be eligible to take the ITC. The words used are registered person. These words were never there under Senvet Credit Rules 2004. Rule 3 of the CCR 2004, which is the fountainhead of the entire CCR, never used the word registered person. It only said a manufacturer or a service provider shall be entitled to take the credit, hereinafter referred to as the Senvet credit. The word used in section 16 is registered person. If during the period, if the person was not registered, maybe under bona fide belief about the non-liability, then can he still be given the benefit of the ITC? In my humble opinion, answer is yes, but this will have to be tested. Yes, I differ on this view. In my humble opinion, yes, it can still be claimed, but this is the proposition which will need the testing before the court of law. No harm in taking this proposition before the first authority, because even when it was available under excise service tax, they never used to give it at the first level. It was only tribunal which was giving. But this is the proposition which can be tested, so therefore so these are the grounds. Then comes to penalty, challenge to penalty. Then coming to the challenge, after challenge to penalty comes the interest, the computation. So these are all grounds which one should jot down. After having done that, on each and every ground, one should really, on a plain paper, put down their submissions. That in what way, articulating the submissions on that. Then, and before that, one should also undertake simultaneously the research on the relevant judgments. For each and every ground, the research on the relevant judgments, those judgments can be cited in support of the defense submissions. This all should be done at the first adjudication level as far as possible. And then it will become very easy for you to draft the appeal. Please beware of the habit of putting this two-line sentence that the learned adjudicating authority is erred in fact and all. Everybody is erring in fact and law when deciding against you, but that will not make it a substantial proper appeal. And unfortunately, in the tribunal, we do come across, when we are actually present in the tribunal, we find that there are sometimes very, very annoying, and the bench gets annoyed looking at such appeals. They make sometimes very harsh comments also, which as a professional, I mean, I would really feel very bad. because it is only because of that sanskar of the income tax appeal which are ingrained in us really, restrain us from really taking up this task under indirect tax much more in a different manner. So be careful on that. Next. No fee is payable for filing an appeal before the first appellate authority. There is a fee payable for the tribunal. I'll come to that. Is appeal and or order under challenge to be affixed with the court fee stamp in excise and service tax? The appeal as well as the order both are required to be affixed with the court fee stamp, but not under GST. And they are accepting the appeal. Is the authorization or board resolution required to be filed along with the appeal in favor of the authorized signatory? No. But if it is demanded, one should keep it handy, but not required to be filed along with the appeal. Is the authorization or wakalatnama required to be filed along with the appeal? No, it can be filed even at the time of the hearing. Is the appeal to be filed on A4 or legal size paper? It all depends upon if the even departmental communication right now remains under the legal size. So for the sake of, because tribunal is accepting the appeal only in the legal size as of now under excise and service tax. The rest of the world has switched over to A4. So high courts are still on the legal size. So it depends upon, you can file A4 before the first appellate authority, no issue on that. Can the appeal be typed on back to back? Never. One should never type the appeal on back to back. Not even reply also. Is double spacing compulsory? No. But generally it should not become too congested. I normally prefer 1.5 spacing for filing the reply. In my all replies and in all my appeal, I prefer that. If it is High Court, obviously we have to follow the High Court standard. Is the appeal with the relevant documents to be consecutively numbered? Yes, it should be done, whether it is provided in law or not. Because when you are arguing, in fact, this practice should be followed even at the time of the adjudication. Your reply with the paper book should always be consecutively numbered. So when you are filing a reply, later on, if you are, and all the relevant documents are filed separately, and judgments are also filed separately, whether it is done or not, two things should always be there. There should be an index, proper index, and everything should be separately, consecutively numbered. So when you are filing an appeal, your appeal page number 1 will start from the first page of the appeal format, and then it will continue. The first exhibit in appeal normally should be order only. Second can be, or the last can be the pre-deposit challan, and then thereafter, after that, the order, then show cause notice, then reply, and then all the relevant documents, other documents and judgments. Whether you are filing it as a part of the appeal or as a separate paper book, please don't always try to develop the habit of putting it under index with the proper page number. This will facilitate your argument before the first appellate authority and tribunal, because then you are only in tribunal, though it is compulsorily to be consecutive numbered, but we should develop this habit at the reply stage also. Next. Filing of an appeal before the appellate tribunal, it is the same thing. There is no, so I will not deal too much with it. Before the appeal tribunal, the appeal will lie against the order passed by an appellate authority and order passed by the revisionary authority. No other authority, it can be challenged before the appellate tribunal. Similarly, the department is also empowered. Commissioner can undertake on his own motion or upon the request of the commissioner of state tax or UT tax, the examination of any order passed by the appellate authority or by any other officer, appellate authority or revisionary authority, and he can then go for the appeal before the tribunal. And these applications, when filed by the commissioner or on behalf of the commissioner, we will call it as a revenue application by the revenue, then it shall be dealt with as if as an appeal. If both the sides are in appeal before the tribunal against the same order, partly the party is agreed with the order and partly the department is agreed with the order. Suppose on merit the demand is confirmed against the party. However, on limitation it is held in favor of the party. Then the party is agreed with the merit, department is agreed with the limitation finding. Both sides can go in appeal, and in that case, both appeal will be required to be heard simultaneously as an appeal. Normally it is heard simultaneously. Next. In case of aggrieved person, again, the time limit is date of communication of the order, 3 months for the party. In case of the department, it is 6 months from the date on which such order is passed. Please mark the word 6 months from the date on which such order is passed. In section 107, for departmental appeal, it is 6 months from the date of communication of the order. It is the same for both, only period is different. For first appellate authority, for the aggrieved person, it is 3 months from the date of communication of the order. For the department, it is 6 months from the date of communication of the order. But in tribunal, for the aggrieved person, it is 3 months from the date of communication. For the department, it is 6 months from the date on which such order is passed. This distinction is very important, very interesting. I'll come to that, in a while. Next. Appeal to be filed. Rest of the thing are almost the same. So I will not deal with too much into this. I will not dwell too much on this. Another thing, friend. Anyway, I'll come to that in a minute. Now, only change is, unlike the first appellate authority, for tribunal, there is a fees to be paid under Rule 5, and that is that fees which is required to be paid for filing the appeal. This is the statutory fees. Ideally, this statutory fees is always payable by a demand draft in favor of it. Can be nationalized bank, it can be any other bank also. Earlier, it was only nationalized bank, but now the other banks are also accepted, and that is the in favor of the registrar. Like today, it is the registrar, C-State, Customs, Excise, Service Tax, Appellate Tribunal, C-State. And then if it is a West Zonal bench, then WZB Mumbai. If it is Ahmedabad, WZB Ahmedabad, like that. If it is Delhi, then it is a Delhi bench. You may write WZB or not, you may write only. So it is a demand draft, the statutory fees. Next. Now, and what is the fees payable? It is rupees 1,000 for every rupees 1 lakh of the amount of tax or ITC or interest or involved, or subject to maximum 25,000. It is or. It is not and. So if there is a tax with interest and penalty, the fees will be based only on the amount of tax. So if it is rupees 1,000 for every 1 lakh rupees, subject to maximum 25,000. There is a present fee structure is very, very low compared to this. It is up to 10 lakh, it is 1,000. Between 10 lakh and 50,000, 50 lakh, it is 5,000. And beyond 5,000, 50 lakh, it is 10,000. This is the present fee structure in the Custom Excise Service Tax Tribunal appeals. However, maybe GST is on a different planet altogether, or it is being believed by everyone. So therefore, there is a comparatively higher fees under GST. Suppose the appeal is only against the penalty, then also these fees will be payable. If the appeal is filed by the company as well as another individual director, partner, or anybody who has been penalized, then separate fees will be payable by individual as well as by the company. Whoever files the appeal against for whatever purpose against the order will be required to pay the fees. Fees is obviously not payable by the department. It is obvious. Next. We now come to another very important aspect, requirement of pre-deposit. There is, as I said, under excise and service tax, prior to 6th August 2014, Section 35F of Excise Act made applicable to service tax by Section 83 of the Finance Act 1994 and Section 129E of the Customs Act 1962 as is existing today. In all these cases provided for the payment of the amount of duty or tax which is demanded and upheld demand confirmed by the adjudication order, along with interest and penalty, So it was a complete payment. But under 35F with 129E, it provided that at appellate authority, first appellate authority or commissioner appeals and tribunal were given unbridled, unchecked powers to waive the pre-deposit condition if the pre-deposit would cause undue hardship, and then automatically it operated as a stay. The pre-deposit waiver can be, I'll deal with that also. Single order for multiple surplus notice. So it dealt with it can be partial deposit, it can be full deposit, it can be anything. but tribunal has this power. First appellate authority had also these powers. However, from 6th August 2014, mandatory pre-deposit concept was also introduced under Excise Service Tax and Customs. And this mandatory pre-deposit is, in case of all these cases, before the first appellate authority, which is Commissioner Appeals in Excise Service Customs Act, it is 7.5% and of the tax or duty amount, not of the penalty or interest. However, if there is only penalty, then it is a 7.5% of the penalty. If it is only interest, then it is 7.5% of interest. But if it is tax with interest and penalty, it is 7.5% of the penalty, tax amount, sorry, or duty amount. This is the current structure. From there, if one goes to the tribunal, then it is another 2.5% of the tax amount or duty amount. So in all, the appellant will pay altogether 10% at combined at the two successive stage, 7.5% plus 2.5%. If the appeal is to the tribunal directly from the commissioner order, then it is directly 7.5%. It is not 10%. It is only 7.5%. I'm coming to that pre-deposit required to be paid even in case of refund or not. So it is it is direct 7.5%. However, the quantum payable by way of a pre-deposit under GST is way high. This is not actually caught the attention of the people the way, but then entire GST law has never caught the attention the way it deserves. What has caught the attention is, I'm very, very sorry to say, is where the opportunities lie. And this is what the taxpayers and the tax professionals have been busy with. I don't want to hurt anybody's sentiments, but it pains me that we all really somewhere culprits for bringing this state of affairs on us. We never objected. When the model GST law came, we were gaga over everything. And what is now, it is now hurting us because as a professional fraternity, what was considered to be the gold mine is now actually turned into the coal mine. वो एक जो सोने की खान सोने की थी वो अभी हमें कोयला नजर आ रहा है. So it is a gold mine converted into the coal mine, and now we are feeling the pinch. All these are the VAT legacy, these are the IT legacy. This should have been actually objected to. The hair and Tomer, actually hammer and tone, we should have done this. Strongly objected. This 10% deposit, and when coupled with that further deposit, is going to kill the small SSEs and SME sector. And this hurting will come in the coming days. Right now, one would not feel it because we are at a very, very nascent stage. Anyway, so what is the requirement is deposit of full amount of that part of tax, interest, fine, fee, and penalty, which is arising of the impugn order, which the appellant admits. If he has admitted that, he has to make the full payment. However, and for the remaining amount of tax in dispute, it is 10%, subject to maximum 25 crores. And once that is done, if this is complied with, if whatever admitted liability is paid in full, then there is no question of the remaining is 10% is paid of the tax amount, not of interest or penalty. Please bear in mind. Then the remaining balance recovery is deemed to be stayed. The question here is, it is a very, very loosely worded provision. The same is under tribunal also, same wording with the change of 10% to 20% and 25 crore to 50 crore. Is, suppose I do not make any payment, please kindly refer to the provision. It says 10% of the remaining amount of tax in dispute. It does not speak about, mercifully, it does not ask you to make the 10% of interest and penalty also. At least board is kind and council is kind. So the deposit of full amount of that part of the tax. Suppose I do not admit anything, then this 10% of the remaining amount, the word remaining amount becomes misnomer. Because nothing is, I'm not paying anything of the remaining amount. I'm challenging the entire demand. So we have to do the reasonable and harmonious construction. If I admit the liability, I pay that much liability in full. If I do not admit the liability, then I pay 10% of the tax amount. If I admit only part, then I pay only part and the 10% of the remaining amount. This is how it should be understood and interpreted and applied. Next. Again, before the tabular, as I said, it is the same thing, but 20% and 50 crore. And this minimum, the maximum limit of 25 crore would mean that if the demand is of say 2000 crore, then also it will be 25 crore. And if the demand is, suppose of the 10 crore, then it will work out to 10% of the 10 crore, if the entire demand is challenged. If the demand is of say 500 crore, then it will be still 10% of 500 crore, which is 50 crore. And then it will be minimum 25 crore, maximum 25 crore at the first level only. So as the amount goes up, the comparatively percentage proportionate, the pre-deposit level will come down. Maybe, I mean, one can happily go higher and higher in avoiding the tax, and probably fraudsters and the black sheeps in the industry, and they have taken the cue that whatever we may do, ultimately it will be, yes, it is a maximum amount, 25 crore under CGST and SGST. I didn't want to make it too much into nitty gritty. These are all to be understood. So these are all 50 crore and 100 crore effectively. And as you see, this is going to hurt in the coming days the taxpayers very, very badly. Let us see this percentage in GST. It is a different matter to prescribe such hard percentage. Yes, under each act. Coming to next.